in every village in Kenya. And number two, the same way we are having a conversation in this summit about finance is the same way we are discussing money going to counties and going to every village. So it's a mirror of what we are doing at the Africa Climate Summit, so that everybody begins to realize that this conversation is not an abstract conversation. This is a real conversation about real issues, real people, real situations, and real opportunities. So we are having that conversation about financing the same way we are having a conversation about how are we going to finance climate action? How are we going to raise the resources to unlock the potential in renewable energy, the potential in green minerals, the potential in the global workforce that is the African population, the potential in 2/3 of the world's arable land being in this continent? How do we unlock that? We need resources. And we are making concrete proposals on how we can do that. We can use SDRs. We can use the balance sheet of the MDBs. We can discuss carbon tax. And we are going to be making very concrete proposals on how to raise that money. The same way we are having a concrete discussion here about the partners that are working with us to raise the resources that will go to the counties. One final request I want to make to my governors. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, whenever there is money for you, I do my very best to release that money. You are witnesses, even if you don't want to agree. Right? But now I have another problem, because many people are telling me now, you're spoiling governors with a lot of money. Because as I talk to you, there is 50 billion Kenya shillings lying at the central bank. My request to you is, please spend this money. I mean, if you spend this money, we will have many Kenyans who are either suppliers or programs roll out, and now I am going to add you more money. So my request to you is, let us make sure that we roll out our programs, we spend these resources. It's good for our economy, and it makes me also collect more tax so that I can do what I have to do. So that is my request to you, because as I push the people in Treasury, they normally remind me, tell your colleagues to spend the money. We are spending too much money guarding it at the central bank. So please, if we can all do that, it will be very good. I wish I was in your situation where somebody is telling me spend money. So let me say again, when I had a conversation with the Council of Governors on this subject, and the chair and her team came to see me, we were very clear on what we need to achieve. And I am very happy that in the backdrop of this Africa Climate Summit, we are rolling out our own Kenya Summit that takes these resources to the lowest level possible. Thank you very much. Let me ask, on behalf of all of us, my brother, the President of Sierra Leone, Julius Bayo, to just make some small comments. I know I didn't prepare him that he was going to make any comment, but let me request him to close this for us, make some comments, because we have a journey to travel with him as we build the coalition that will bring renewable energy intervention into our continent. My brother, Mr. President, welcome.
Sit down, please.
But in order to avoid doing what they ought to be
Your
doing
Excellency,
within their own factories and so on, Third, on the supply side, the quality actually was highly mixed. We didn't monitor very well. There was all kind of duplication. There was leakage. And so over the years, the enthusiasm just flagged. And we had a dreadful lost decade. So the question is this different? And I think the answer is yes. And that's why we at the Bezos Earth Fund are the biggest funder, I believe, of the standard-setting organizations. We're a founding member of GIAP, which is totally committed, as we've heard today, to ACMI. And we co-started, as John Kerry said today, the Energy Transition Accelerator. We believe very genuinely that this offers an opportunity for all countries, but Africa in particular deserves a much bigger piece of any pie. It is simply not right that Africa should have 40% of the solar capacity in the world and only 2% of the installed solar energy. It is not right that in rich countries, 81% of investment in renewable energy is a private sector investment, whilst in Africa and the developing world, it's only 14%. We need to use carbon markets to focus on people, and I think there's a really encouraging sign. Number one, the supply of money is higher. Corporations, whether in rich countries or in developing emerging countries, are now getting it. They are willing to engage. They are also getting the fact that they cannot get a cheap way out of what they need to be doing themselves. Second, the supply is becoming much higher quality. We've learned how to do it right, and we now can actually measure impact. Satellites can show virtually every tree falling and every tree growing. They can also show methane emissions. We now can actually track carbon emissions very accurately, so we know when things aren't going very well. Most important of all now, I think we've understood that this is about people. In the early days, it was tons of carbon. Yes, tons of carbon matter, but what matters even more is livelihoods. And as several speakers have said today, how extremely cool it is that we could be investing carbon money to actually double farmers' incomes. Carbon is too valuable to leave up there in the atmosphere. We need it down here in the form of trees and bushes and crops and soils, where instead of death it brings life and vitality. It brings resilience. It can help growth. And what's true for the rural environment is true for energy as well. We ought to be using carbon markets to bring renewable energy, clean energy, to reduce pollution, to improve health, and so on. That's why we believe in it, and that's why we set up the Energy Transitions Accelerator, and we're looking for parties that would be interested in being co-investors in this. And we love what's been said today about ACMI, Africa's carbon markets, driven by African for African citizens. So thank you very much.
It's excellent. Thank you very much. I think at this stage we want to talk about a little bit about some of the actual mechanisms that we've identified within ACMI. We're going to go into detail on two specific ones. These bottlenecks, whoever's in control, if you wouldn't mind changing the slide. Thank you. So one of the main ones that we heard about today, which really I think has had a watershed moment, is obviously an advanced market commitment or advanced market signal. It's important, obviously, to know that the money is there on the other side, but now it's actually getting into the details of what that money is for, how many credits does that represent, what is required in order to achieve the payments, for example, and it becomes extremely complex. It would be great if we can have, as Secretary Kerry had alluded to, a global market with a single price. But the reality is, we're going to have several markets. Some are regional, some will be international, some will be obligatory, and some of it will be voluntary. And because you have such a wide array of different kind of eligibility criteria and different considerations from an investment perspective, we really wanted to attack this head on by going to one of the main bottlenecks that we've heard about within ACMI. Which is kind of perceived or real political risk. And I would say it's not just political risk, it's really regulatory risk more than anything else. So the need for deployment early stage, needing to come into the market very quickly. Clearly, there are pools of capital in the private sector that are well suited for that. But the markets themselves are not that well established so that that investment can be de-risked later on in the project life cycle, as you see in other asset classes. So Virtree views carbon as a new asset class. And one of the ways that we're working to really kind of move the chains is by creating a government-sponsored platform, working government by government, starting at the end, understanding what it is that they're trying to achieve from a revenue maximization standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, what sort of specific, let's call it technical aspects in terms of project design and methodological design are important to them. And then with government support through a series of binding agreements, we can be very agnostic into how we invest into projects, how those projects are then run, and really kind of most importantly, I would say, is what the commercialization model is for those projects at the end. Because it's clear that fixed prices for 20 years are fit for purpose for some projects, but certainly not for others. And ultimately, governments have that right and will always retain that right, so they also have to have the flexibility. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to be as agnostic as possible, working with governments bilaterally on a sponsored basis, and then having that platform open the doors to other developers who have obviously relationships, experience on the ground, have been in communities for decades, and then adding value where we can along the value chain and across the project life cycle. But most importantly, it's always being aligned with governments, right? We have no interest, and I think most people in the market really have no interest in locking up deals that don't stand the test of time, because interests are inherently not going to be aligned. So ACMI has really been incredibly effective at bringing all of those stakeholders to the table, and moving the dialogue in helping governments, helping investors, emitters, different stakeholders that are key to this market, to try to kind of understand where we want to get to, and then creating mechanisms, borrowed from traditional finance that absolutely can address some of those concerns and brings those projects to market. One of the most successful ones has been a voluntary carbon market linked swap, which Standard Chartered has pioneered. And next, I'd like to hand it over. To Lamine Maja, who can talk about some of the work they're doing within Standard Chartered.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Standard Chartered Bank is a leading international bank in the forefront of the drive to accelerate climate finance. We want to drive impact primarily in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, because this is where our presence is, and this is also the region where the impact of climate change is more severe, and the regions that are least prepared for it. As a bank, we are preparing to mobilize $300 billion by the year 2030 in terms of sustainable finance. And so far, as of 2021, we have been able to mobilize about $48 billion. Now, carbon pricing through carbon emissions trading is a primary mechanism for capital allocation and emissions reduction. Implementing carbon pricing to ensure that the polluter pays is a widely accepted driver of net zero reduction transition. Voluntary carbon markets allow for companies to voluntarily fund nature or technology projects. Now, the voluntary carbon market has existed for several years, but I would say it is fragmented, it lacks standardization, and there have been issues of reputation as well, which I think Dr. Andrew has mentioned.
To come on stage, His Excellency Julius Maada to also come on stage, His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, His Excellency Nangolo Mbumba, the COG Chair, Her Excellency Anne Waiguru, then the partners who are involved in this as we now are going to receive the check. We have Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, and World Bank. It's going to be a big picture, a family picture. So let's also have the check presented so that we may have the evidence that it is there. Let's also have the CS for Treasury, Prof, to come also be part of this picture. All right, so and the president has to verify that it is actual money. There you go. He has verified. Mr. President, is it signed? It's not signed. I'm sure the signature will come. That was on a light note. So we'll now display. Let him sign. And there we have it. So the COG chair will receive it on behalf of the counties. With a warm clap, please. Wonderful, wonderful. And with that, we may then exit the stage. I'll request that we all be upstanding now, as we have come to the end of this particular session. Thank you, Your Excellencies. So with that, we have come to the end of this particular session, so I'll request that we remain standing as we now allow the presidents, the vice president and deputy presidents to leave, and the rest of us will leave according to the protocol. Thank you very much. Do have yourselves a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lamine. Appreciate those comments and really for your leadership in this space, for yourself and that of Standard Chartered. Next, I'd like to hand over to Angela, and want to hear a little bit just from a personal perspective, as well as your work in EDF, what this market means to you and the potential that you see that it can have for Africa.
Thank you very much, Ariel, and good afternoon. It's indeed a pleasure to be here as part of this, what I would say, a historical moment in having this conference in my hometown. And seeing the great turnout. First of all, EDF is a global nonprofit organization that works at the intersection of policy, science, and economics to address the greatest challenge that's facing us, that's climate change. So we strive to understand the challenge, to define and advocate for solutions that are people-centered, and we do this in partnership with peers across different sectors and across different regions. We work with indigenous peoples, groups, we work with government, we work with corporate players and investors, all of whom we believe are absolutely critical to being able to advance action on climate change. Turning to the subject at hand, and I think I think virtually every African gets to hear through their life that if you don't know your past, you do not know where you're going. And it's the same thing with carbon markets. And while Africa has had a past of limitations in terms of inadequate access to the market, in some cases, some not very good experiences with the kind of projects that have been put forward, the numbers that William put up, there is a story behind each of those numbers. And I think it's important to also look at the other side of the experience that Africa has had. We have projects such as the work KenGen has done. And I don't know how many people know KenGen, but as the power generating utility in this country, they have generated close to 5 million credits for large-scale projects, the kind of projects that we believe could be scaled up through things like the Energy Transition Accelerator, through ACMI. We have the wind power farms in northern Kenya. We have the concentrated solar power in North Africa. We have some great examples of what good looks like and what it is we need to be replicating and scaling up. Of course, to do this, we then need to think about where do we need to accelerate the action. One relates to capacity. I think a big problem we have here, and I'm really excited that ACMI is looking into this issue, is that it's not that we lack capacity on this continent, but much of our capacity is either misplaced because there's no demand for that set of skills, so people go off and do something else, or it's displaced. We go and seek that expertise elsewhere. We need to find a way to tap into that capacity, however little it is, and institutionalize this. And I was very encouraged to hear that there are conversations around working with the African universities to start scaling up and pushing out the expertise that's going to be needed to implement a market at scale. Now, the carbon market is not just about decarbonization, it's about investment, it's about accountability, it's about inclusion, it's about putting in place a whole range of systems that are part of the heart and soul of climate action. And therefore, I think the effort that's been made through ACMI should not be seen as something on the side, as just relating to that thing called carbon markets, but is an integral part of how we're going to transform the societies by strengthening and enhancing those institutional capacities to monitor, to follow, to engage, and to make partners of all the relevant stakeholders, not in a passive way, but as active participants in owning the process. I want to end with just two short points, since I see the clock's running, and I could probably speak all day on this. One relates to price. And I hear quite often when I talk to people about this is that the price for African credits is low. And part of this is, one, because of the type of projects, where they're held, but also by the long-held and persistent perception of risk. And sometimes this is not rightly so. And that's why we need to start telling the stories of these small successes, because this is what's going to show people that it is possible to accelerate these efforts. So to get to where we want to go, I think we need to move fast to change the narrative for Africa. The best way to do it is to start implementing those projects, to start bringing the beneficiary story, and start crowding in those stakeholders. And as the Environmental Defense Fund, we are ready to continue working with partners across this region and across different sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And just to so we're out of time for our panel. So I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank all of you for listening today. And I will hand it over to William, who will introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful panel. Things are running late today, and we do apologize. Please give a round of applause to what was a very distinguished panel as they resume their seats. Thank you so much, Andrew, Lamine, Angela, and Ariel, for those important points. As we've been talking all along, all these different pieces need to work together in order for carbon markets to develop at the ambition and the scale that we want to. Now, ACMI was literally born at COP27. And at COP27, ACMI made a number of promises. What you have been hearing throughout this session today is how ACMI has been keeping those promises. And when we were launched at COP27, we had a goal that every promise that we made at COP27 would be achieved at COP28. And I'm really glad that you've all had a chance to hear that. And then we have a very important speaker, and I do thank him for his patience and for his humility in waiting, because obviously he's an incredibly busy person. And this is none other than Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Majid, who is the director of COP28. Please give him a round of applause as he approaches the stage and gives us his remarks as we close.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. It's always difficult to close out after so many expert speakers, those who've made such a difference in the carbon markets world, and I hope I'll do my best to keep up with the expertise that we've seen today and the wonderful people who've contributed to this process. Excellencies, colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. The COP28 presidency firmly believes that carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, are an important, as yet underutilized tool in delivering climate action. With only 7 years remaining to rein in emissions and keep 1.5 within reach, we need every tool at our disposal. Our goal here must be to resolve the issues that are holding us back and from using all the tools in our toolbox. VCMs, which span both the energy transition and climate finance, are an important part of the COP28 action agenda. VCMs can contribute to climate mitigation by disincentivizing actions that would otherwise lead to higher emissions, or by incentivizing those that reduce emissions. Examples of this include reduced deforestation, supporting the transition to more efficient cook stoves, or facilitating the uptake of clean energy technologies. It also includes efforts to boost the removal or sequestration of CO2 through reforestation, incentives to foster the protection and expansion of ecosystems, or through direct air capture. According to the IPCC, VCMs could play a major role in funding the removal of 3 to 4 gigatons of global emissions by 2030. Aside from mitigation, VCMs can also drive important environmental, social, and economic co-benefits. This includes protecting biodiversity, improving soil and water, and boosting jobs and livelihoods for local communities. On the finance side, credible and high-integrity carbon markets can help mobilize flows of cross-border financing, particularly to the Global South. There's also complementarity between VCMs and Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, with clear opportunities to harmonize country and corporate level financing. However, to achieve their potential, we must first reconcile the reality that in their current form, carbon markets face a crisis of confidence. A lack of unified, commonly agreed standard is undermining their integrity and diminishing their value. Our primary objective must be to restore confidence in carbon markets and to ensure that the highest integrity standards are firmly in place and actively implemented. On this point, allow me to recognize the role of the African Carbon Markets Initiative, ACMI, together with African governments, for the leadership in establishing regulatory environments that are conducive to private investments. And this is only a fraction of what is possible. The carbon market opportunity in Africa is significantly under-realized, with less than 2/3 of Africa's credits coming from only 5 countries, and with almost all projects focused on just 2 sectors, energy and forestry land use. This leaves significant room for growth. If developed with a focus on integrity and credibility, VCMs could boost critical climate finance and support green growth and development. This can help deliver multitudes of climate action across a range of sectors, including adaptation, decarbonization, biodiversity protection, and more. The COP28 presidency welcomes the continuous efforts by ACMI and partners to develop and scale up high-integrity carbon projects. And we support the ambitious goals of the ACMI to raise the quality and integrity of African credits and mobilize up to $6 billion annually by 2030. and 120 billion by 2050. Colleagues, the sheer scope and scale of the climate challenge is such that we need trillions, not billions. And the reality is that none of us can foot such a bill alone. We need every dollar working towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient future that we all aspire to. Voluntary carbon markets are an important piece of this puzzle and have the potential to unlock otherwise untapped resources. We need to work together to scale up high-integrity carbon markets, including more carbon market activation plans at a national level. We need to foster closer collaboration with private sector partners and encourage investment in high-quality transactions, particularly those that prioritize the participation of local communities. And we need to continue to align VCM integrity efforts with those to operationalize Article 6 to ensure synergies of public and private investments. By uniting your expertise, resources, and influence, we can establish, implement, and deploy a framework that ensures integrity, transparency, credibility, and accountability for voluntary carbon markets. By harmonizing efforts, acting in unity, and focusing on integrity, the potential of this tool can be realized. And this will bring us closer to our ultimate goal of delivering transformative progress against the Paris Agreement. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, the COP28 presidency appreciates the efforts of the African Climate Markets Initiative and its partners in furthering this discussion. We look forward to further outcomes to help drive integrity in VCMs, and we look forward to working with each of you to push forward this process and to help bring this unique and potential game-changing resource to fruition. Thank you so much.
I would really like for us to appreciate the remarks of His Excellency Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, not just because he is representing what will be possibly the biggest COP ever, but also for his strong endorsement of the African Carbon Markets Initiative, but most importantly for his humility and patience in waiting for us in what has been a delayed session. Please give him another round of applause and appreciate him. So this brings us to the close of our session. I want to thank all of you for sitting through this. We have heard everything that needs to work, needs to be gotten right in order for carbon markets to work at the scale and ambition that we would like them. I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists, speakers, all those working in the background to make this successful, and all of those who have helped to spread the message of the African Carbon Markets Initiative. I assure you that this is a worthy cause for Africa, and I assure you that this will be successful this time around, Andrew. I heard your remarks loud and clear. This time it will be successful because we've got all the actors in the room and we're all working towards the same goal. Thank you very much for an excellent session, and may you have a pleasant rest of your summit. Thank you.
Ndiyo nguzo ya nchi yetu, tukiungana sote pamoja, tutaijenga Kenya yetu.
Kwa amani na upendo tuendeleze utu wetu. Haya yote tukizingatia, baraka tele tutapokea.
Vijana, wazee, kina mama, tunaweza tukiungana. Furaha, usawa na ustawi, Mungu Baba tatujalia. So full of, njooni wazalendo sote tuimbe. So full of, njooni wazalendo sote tuimbe. Harambee, pamoja tutafika kilele. Harambee, na Kenya tutaishi milele. Harambee, pamoja tutafika kilele.
Transition with other sectors like health, climate change, and gender mainstreaming. Allow me to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you all for making time to attend this important session. Once again, karibuni sana, which means you are most welcome in our national language, Kiswahili. With those few remarks, I officially open this high-level session on the role of women in energy transition for a sustainable future in Africa. Thank you very much, and may the Lord bless you.
Thank you, Excellency. Let's give her a better clap. And thank you because you know you're a formidable champion of environment conservation. And thank you for those remarks. At this point, Your Excellencies, I want to call Dr. Linda Davis, who is going to be a moderator for the next session, to come in front, say something, and introduce the panelists and continue from here. Karibu sana Daktari. Let's give her a clap as she comes to the front.
Thank you very much for those kind remarks. I am so excited and privileged to guide the next hour. We have had very, very important remarks today from the excellencies that have spoken and those that are represented here. I respectfully observe all protocols. Thank you very much for being here. So we are here to do business. Let me start by saying that. We have heard that African women want to be included in the energy transition. It is we're no longer asking. We are saying we have a plan. We have a plan in place. All we need is to be allowed to create solutions that include us. We heard from the young people earlier today who said we do not want just to be referred to as vulnerable women.
room, private sector, civil society, youth groups, children, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yeah, let's start on a good note. It's going to be African member states and foreign governments to ensure that there is a mutual beneficial partnership in investment, and certainly that we are able to invest and finance adaptation and resilience in nature-based economies. And to get us started this afternoon, we have Honorable Collins Nzovu, Member of Parliament and the Minister for Green Economy and Environment in Zambia. Honorable Minister.
Distinguished Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you now. And obviously the importance of this session can be easily seen by the packed audience. Welcome to Kenya, welcome to Africa, the natural capital superpower. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the abundance of biodiversity in Africa is something we should be incredibly proud of and cherish deeply. It makes us unique, it makes us strong, and it provides unlimited possibilities for our great nations and our people. It is therefore befitting that following the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement, and the Kigali Call to Action dubbed Investment in Nature and Biodiversity Ministerial. This is one of the 7 pillars at the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. It is therefore indeed my pleasure to welcome you all to this hugely important session and broader summit, which clearly demonstrates the leadership role African nations are taking when it comes to implementing the crucial climate and nature agreements made in previous years. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, now having led Zambia's newest ministry, the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, for over 2 years now, one thing is very clear as day to me. If we are to unlock nature's potential and preserve its value, financing which is accessible, which is adequate, and which is affordable is key. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, therefore the implementation of ambitious global agreements like the landmark 30 by 30 goal to become reality, we must ensure that our significant natural capital endowment places full recognition and the financial value it bestows on the planet. That means working together with partners in the global north to ensure that everyone is contributing to the cost of protecting the environment. Africans and non-Africans alike, pooling resources to invest in our collective future, which rests on the protection of key biodiversity hotspots, such as the majestic rainforests of Central Africa, the ethereal savannas of Kenya and Ethiopia, the rich ocean waters of Gabon and South Africa, the mangroves of Nigeria and Mozambique, the handsome deserts of Egypt and Morocco, and the vibrant wetlands of Zambia, to name but a few. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this ministerial event will focus on unlocking financing for nature at scale in Africa, with particular focus on large-scale forest protection through a COP30 roadmap to scale forest carbon credits, catalyzing finance for the restoration of graded land, and looking for convergence and leverage of existing financing agreements, including working with partners in the global north to ensure delivery of an increase in nature finance to at least $20 billion by 2025 and $30 billion by 2030. Furthermore, the panel will make some announcements of major financial arrangements. So I encourage you all here to stay and listen carefully. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there's no time to waste. as stewards of over 1/3 of the world's biodiversity, we as Africans have a vital role to play in delivering on global agreements for nature, and I have no doubt whatsoever that when we succeed, generations to come will reap the benefits, and Africa will thrive alongside nature. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister, for being so succinct, but raising the very important issue that we need market mechanisms to work for the nature that we're protecting, that is crucial for our common 1.5-degree future. And to take us to our next segment is Minister Juan Runchi, the Minister for Ecology and Environment in China, the President for COP15, who will give us a roadmap based on the statement by Minister Njovu, the roadmap to CBD COP16. Minister, we have issued translation. He will be speaking in Chinese.
Okay. Everybody get this? No?
The team had started circulating them. Please get them to as more people as possible. Minister, if I may break protocol a little bit while we wait for these translation devices, because we long asked for them to be distributed. I will, for time purposes, as we wait for them to be distributed, Minister, okay, that I call on Mafalda.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Fiona, if you can get that sorted, thank you. I know that our keynote address was going to be given later by Ms. Mafalda Duarte, the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. But I am making do as the person with the gavel to make sure that we still keep the program running while we figure out logistics. And if Mafalda, you can humor me, I would like to welcome you to the stage to give us your keynote. Thank you.
I'm trying to push. That's it. Is it? Okay. Very good. Minister Collins, great to see you. Minister, okay. Pleasure. Okay, so thank you very much. It's rather a privilege to be here with you today. Greetings, Ujambo. I think this is in Swahili. And let me thank the Kenyan government for the leadership, as Minister Collins was mentioning, for the leadership on climate action and leadership also demonstrated in organizing this summit, which is so critical for Africa, but globally as well, and for the hospitality of all of the Kenyan people. Minister Collins was mentioning why are nature-based solutions so critical. I think we all know. They play a key role in climate adaptation. They protect the communities from flooding and coastal hazards. They provide sources of fresh water, they safeguard our biodiversity, and they maintain food and livelihood sources for local communities. Also, the conservation of ecosystems like peatlands, wetlands, rangelands, mangroves, and forests deliver quite immediate benefits. They play a vital role in climate mitigation through the absorption and storage of carbon dioxide. In fact, they can provide up to 1/3 of the mitigation opportunity required to achieve a 1.5 degrees pathway. But these solutions can also shield developing countries from the climate disasters, reducing their intensity by 26%, and can save many billions of dollars in related costs in the years to come. Africa is critical in this regard. The continent has the potential to generate very significant wealth from stewarding its natural capital, including through the continent's 65% of the world's uncultivated Arab land. If we just think about this number. Africa also holds the key to reducing and removing carbon emissions on a global scale. Minister, we were talking about the forests. The second largest tropical forest in the world, the Congo Basin, actually absorbs more carbon than the tropical forests of the Amazon and Southeast Asia combined. And they shelter species that are found nowhere else on Earth. Minister Collins also mentioned, but to do this, to tap into this potential, finance is critical. Africa's natural resources are suffering from significant, very significant underinvestment and undervaluation. We know very well that Africa receives only 12% of the financing required to address climate impacts, and only 16% of the climate finance is actually supporting Africa's agriculture, forestry, and other land use sectors. I've taken the helms of the Green Climate Fund basically a month ago. I started on August 1st. It's an honor and a privilege. What is the Green Climate Fund doing to support and bridge Africa's nature finance gap? The GCF is investing nearly $5 billion in the continent, of which nearly 1.5 is directed to transforming agriculture, forestry, land use, and ecosystems in 41 countries. And some examples of this work include right here in Kenya, a project which I have actually had the privilege of visiting some of the beneficiaries of this project over the weekend. It's in fact several projects, but we are supporting a resilient agriculture fund, a RAF, and they themselves are supporting many local companies that are doing a number of things in support of smallholder farmers. I visit some of them. I visit some farmers which have benefited from solar-powered water pumps. And I've also visited farmers, smallholder farmers, that have benefited from support to introduce regenerative agriculture techniques. And have heard from the communities and these farmers the impact that it has made in their lives in terms of productivity increase, increased income, savings, and how they have been better equipped to withstand the drought which Kenya has been suffering from. Other examples include our commitment to the Great Green Wall initiative. As of July of this year, the Green Climate Fund has approved 35 funding proposals in the 11 Green Great Wall countries, so Burkina, Chad, Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Sudan. We are going to be investing $3 billion and mobilizing another $9 billion to help deliver on the ambitious objectives of this really critical initiative. And part of this, $115 million to enhance access to credit and technical assistance for local farmers, farmer organizations, cooperatives, and micro and small-sized enterprises. But the minister also said there would be announcements, so I will make one. So I'm very thrilled to share that we have recently approved supporting with almost $190 million, a new fund and green fund. This is in support of a facility that is almost $1 billion to promote sustainable agriculture in the DRC, Gabon, Zambia, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and Liberia. This fund, which is comprised of grants and loans and seeks to mobilize private sector co-financing, will be promoting sustainable commodity production and higher productivity of tropical agriculture commodities like rubber and cocoa, and thus reducing the practice of forest clearing for agriculture purposes. The aim is to transform tropical agriculture commodity supply chains from extractive to sustainable practices while being socially inclusive. The GCF, we are currently going through our third funding round, and we are raising resources for the next programming cycle of 2024-2027. Of course, we count on the leadership of our current and potentially new shareholders to really deliver on an ambitious replenishment so that we can work closely with many of you to deliver much more impact across Africa and globally on this very important agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mafalda, for agreeing to step in as we sorted out technical matters. I'm also glad to receive your announcement for the GCF Deforestation Free Fund to agri-processors in DRC, Gabon, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia. We didn't hear Zambia, so we were going to protest, but then we heard it. So thank you so much. Recognizing that fund, I would like for us to give another round of applause to Mafalda. I understand that translation services are now back up, and I will then have the honor of calling on the minister from China to give us the roadmap to CBD COP16 and delivering on 30 by 30, attaching it to the statement by Minister Nzovu. Minister Runchi.
Okay. I'm sorry I have to speak Chinese because my English is not so good. Thank you. You're good? Good? Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed.
Say that green hydrogen is too expensive today. They also say that because green hydrogen, to produce green hydrogen, you require water, and water is increasingly a scarce resource, it is a potential risk to the livelihoods of citizens and populations. Fortunately, with regards to both those concerns, we can see that green hydrogen production, and some of the panelists today will speak to that, can be placed in the coastlines of the continent and can use desalination, water desalination processes to drive green hydrogen production, thereby mitigating any risks associated with utilization of scarce water resources. Secondly, with regards to cost, and we will again explore this, we are seeing significant drops in the cost of producing green hydrogen year on year. And so, with regards to all these challenges, we know that this is indeed a new sector, and that it is transformative. But we also know that any challenges that it is facing, any challenges that it faces, are well within range of mitigation within a relatively short period of time. So let me switch to the transformative potential of green hydrogen. And let me quickly give you two examples of where we see green hydrogen addressing opportunities to create jobs, to increase the GDP of countries, to reduce emissions, and to anchor demand for additional renewable energy and energy access. The first one on the next slide is the opportunity that iron ore and the production of green steel offers the continent. Ironically, Africa produces 77 million tons of iron ore annually. That accounts for less than 1% of global steel production. And paradoxically, Africa then imports 6 million tons of steel. So you can see straight away there's an opportunity. We know also that 40% of new city dwellers globally will be in African cities. And those African cities will need to build additional buildings that will have increased demand for steel. So there is an opportunity to reduce transportation costs, to onshore manufacturing, to use green hydrogen to provide the extreme heat that is required for steel production in Africa, and thereby to create an estimated 24,000 direct jobs and 215,000 indirect jobs, delivering an incremental $20 billion of revenue to the continent and providing anchor demand for energy access and bankability of 20 gigawatts for Africa. And so you can see there's a real opportunity there to utilize green hydrogen as a fuel for green industry and onshoring green industry. The last example I want to share with you, on the next slide please, is the utilization of bauxite and smelting bauxite to create green aluminum. We know that there is a significant amount of bauxite on the continent. In fact, 98% of Africa's bauxite comes from Guinea, and almost all of it is exported unprocessed. Utilizing green energy at scale could produce green aluminum and save 335 million tons of CO2 every year, which would be close to 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It would create 60,000 new direct jobs and nearly 280,000 new jobs, new indirect jobs could be created. In addition to that, it would deliver $37 billion of additional revenue for Africa and be an anchor to drive energy access on the continent. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree with me that as we think about the huge renewable energy potential that Africa possesses, in order to write the check to withdraw the money in that bank account, we need to use green hydrogen to unlock new opportunities, to drive new green industries, to create base load and anchor demand for energy access, to reduce emissions for hard-to-abate industries such as steel and aluminum smelting, and to help not only Africa, but the globe combat climate change. So with that, I would like to invite our esteemed panel this afternoon, it's already afternoon, and I'd like to ask you to welcome to the stage the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy, Mr. Alex Washira. Karibu Bwana Washira. Please welcome Mr. Washira. Please also help me to welcome the Honorable Minister for Electricity in the Presidency, Republic of South Africa, Minister Nkosi. Welcome, Minister.
bugirege koranju bwenda nyama no morembe ya bugirege koranju bugambye buya no borembe ya bugirege koranju bugambye buya no borembe twanye to.
And last but not least, please give a warm welcome to the Minister for Economy and Sustainable Development from Mauritania, Honorable Saleh. Welcome, Minister Saleh.
Etwani yabugire, etwani enze yaito. Yabugire koranju bwenda nyama no morembe. Yabugire koranju bugambye buya no borembe. Yabugire koranju bugambye buya no borembe. Twanye yaito ya Kenya na ingo janji ko yerora.
So, welcome to our esteemed panel. Speaking to the opening remarks and the scene setting, perhaps I could turn to our host, P.S. Wachira, and just perhaps to begin with, if you could just share with us how Kenya seeks to exploit the potential of green hydrogen and the opportunity that green hydrogen presents.
Thank you, Richard, you have clearly illustrated the ways in how that we can be able to utilize our green hydrogen. You have clearly enumerated the areas in which Africa stands to gain and the kind of jobs that Africa stands to create and the kind of resources that Africa stands to earn by getting into green hydrogen space. Now, Kenya, we are not left behind. Our president, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, clearly illustrated that we do have about 93% of our energy as clean energy, mainly driven by geothermal, which constitutes about 49% of our renewable energy and total build capacity, and followed by hydro, wind, and solar in that order. In terms of now using, Kenya is in the forefront. One, we are almost done with the green hydrogen strategy, the country framework. Number two is that we are, because of now our renewable energy potential, we want now to get into the production of green hydrogen. And we are not only talking about production, we're also talking about manufacturing of electrolyzers, because we have been importing most of our items, but it's about time that we also talk about how do we also manufacture the electrolyzers that are going to be the key critical ingredient in manufacturing of green hydrogen. And also, water, most of the African water that can be used for manufacturing of green hydrogen is water from the ocean, and we know very well that water from the ocean is salty, and therefore it needs desalination. So we're also talking of how do we desalinate the water, what can we produce in Kenya that we can export to our brother and sister countries across Africa, and that is the desalination equipment as well as the electrolyzers. So we are not only looking at producing green hydrogen for manufacturing and export, but we are also looking at producing and exporting the electrolyzers to ensure that we become also an exporting country. Thank you, Kiplagat.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's interesting that you mentioned that you are developing a green hydrogen roadmap. Is there anything else you could tell us about that roadmap, and what does that roadmap entail in terms of where how we want to go forward with regards to green hydrogen?
There is a reason why I do not want to let the cat out of the bag yet, because tomorrow is when now we shall let you know the details of the green hydrogen strategy. So allow me not to diverge a lot of details and create some suspense in you, such that you can be able to join us tomorrow at midday as we launch the strategy.
Okay, all right. Sorry to have preempted to have preempted that launch. Maybe just one follow-up question is one of the opportunities that green hydrogen presents as a fuel is the byproduct of green ammonia. And I know that that's something that Kenya has been looking into. Kindly just speak to us about the opportunity that green ammonia presents for Kenya, the link to perhaps our agricultural sector, and I think very importantly, the offtake, the local offtake as a key driver for the development of green hydrogen in Kenya.
Thank you, Kiplagan, once again. Kenya is looking to substitute about 50% of our nitrogen fertilizers with green alternatives by 2030. And so therefore, Kenya is ready to offtake the green ammonia, the green fertilizer that is going to be produced for industrialization and promoting economic growth, as well as job creation beyond the energy sector. So we are looking at green hydrogen, not only as the fuel part of it, but also the byproducts. Again, I forgot to mention that as we move towards production of green hydrogen, we're also looking towards manufacturing of solar panels and also wind turbines, because Africa is endowed in enough terawatt hours of solar, as well as enough gigawatt hours of wind. And so therefore, because Africa mainly has been importing those two, the wind turbines as well as solar panels, then it's about time that as we gear towards manufacturing of green hydrogen, then we also manufacture the solar panels and we also manufacture the wind turbines, so that we produce the green hydrogen and offtake in terms of green hydrogen in production of ammonia, such that we reduce our nitrogen-based fertilizers to green fertilizer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PS. Just turning to you, Mr. Minister Nkosi. South Africa has made significant strides in terms of planning, development of green hydrogen valley and roadmap. Please tell us a little bit about how your own vision has unfolded and some of the lessons that we in this room could learn as Africans from the trailblazing that you've done in South Africa.
No, thank you very much, and once more good afternoon to everyone in the House and fellow panelists. I think your opening remarks are particularly useful in surfacing the potential of green hydrogen. So the first one is that it's driven by sovereign interest, and in this instance, at least the South African experience is to ensure that in the course of the exploitation of this fuel source, we are able to address strategic sovereign objectives like universal access and ensuring that we are able to industrialize on the back of this opportunity. And we are beginning to provide concrete meaning to the just energy transition. We are giving it South African characteristics. So that's the first part. The second one is we don't see ourselves as an island. We think that it is important that the countries on the African continent, and in this instance sub-Saharan Africa, should seek to aggregate their efforts. We're doing a lot of work with our neighbor in Namibia, trying to develop, if you like, a green hydrogen corridor, because we think that there's a significant amount of opportunities that can be achieved on the basis of aggregation and scale. So we are undermining both the administrative and political boundaries, and we are seeing beyond just those limitations. The third one is the indispensable nature of the private sector, given their agility. They are sitting on a big pool of liquidity. Some of them have advanced technology. So it's important that there has to be collaboration and cooperation between the public and private sector. So we don't see that as a binary conversation. There's a point of intersection. So we're working with the private sector to ensure that we are able to create the necessary regulatory environment that can propel the exploitation of green hydrogen. So we have developed a green hydrogen commercialization strategy that is anchored on 6 pillars. First, we do see the importance of the domestic market. We have some of the most prominent and marquee companies in the country that have begun to transition. And this is largely on the back of their existential questions that are confronting them. We do anticipate that the most industrialized Western countries are likely going to introduce carbon borders. So I think what these firms are beginning to do is to reposition themselves in anticipation of that eventuality so that they don't lose out on those markets. So you see that companies like Anglo-American, they've developed what we call a green hydrogen valley. They've already starting to commercialize the retrofitting of some of the big trucks, the form of propulsion. They are moving from combustion engine and going the green hydrogen route. We're seeing a big company like Sasol, which is essentially the biggest polluter in the country. They do see the future, their obligation to the environment and also to posterity. They are beginning to infuse, if you like, bring into on board the exploitation of new renewable resources. So what we're doing is to collaborate with them, because we think that working together we will be able to fashion the most comprehensive, cogent and efficacious response on what the green hydrogen agenda poses. And then also there's issues around industrialization on the back of this green hydrogen agenda. So we're doing a lot of work given the significant amount of deposits, especially on the platinum group of metals between ourselves and our neighbors in the North Zimbabwe. We've got over 80% of the known deposits of PGM. So it's important that we don't export our resource in the most unrefined fashion, but we are able to introduce capabilities internally working with the private sector to ensure that we are able to exploit this resource. And in this way, we are able to illustrate to the general public the relationship between this decarbonization agenda and their own selfish benefits and also the benefits of the country, so that the conversation around green hydrogen is not left to the enlightened, the boardroom discussions and those who are part of the political and business elite, but is able to make that connection with ordinary people. And in that way, you are democratizing the conversation and you are increasing the participation rate. And that's how we see the pathway of green hydrogen. So those are some of the key elements for us that we think are sacrosanct in the exploitation of this resource. Speed is important. Doing is important. I think we've been discussing and discussing. We should get to a point where we get to do. And of course, we are likely going to make mistakes. As we do, we'll rectify those mistakes. It's those that do that are likely going to make mistakes. Otherwise, we can fold our arms and allow this resource to be exploited by other people. So it is in our collective interest that we work together to exploit the resources.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you made some really important points there, particularly with regards to democratizing the conversation and making sure that we carry the population along. I recently read that there's a new green hydrogen fund that has been put together. Could you just unpack to us what that fund looks like and how the resources will be applied to accelerating green hydrogen projects in South Africa?
Well, yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think financing is going to be a major part of the work that we're doing. So that's a $1 billion US fund. So we want to achieve a number of things. So ensure that there's great levels of appetite to invest upstream of the project life cycle. So we know that a lot of this technology is still in its nascent stages. So it's important that we're able to invest in these technologies upstream, pre-feasibility studies. The state must also illustrate its commitment by putting the skin in the game. The state is prepared to take the first loss, and we want to use this financing instrument, if you like, facility to make it possible for us to advance this project to get closer to financial close. So risk appetite, it's important. So we really are trying to address that part of the work. The second one is that we need to develop a capability on the part of, in the arena of project management, if you like. The state doesn't necessarily sit with a monopoly of skills on what is required for you to put together a very aggressive and ambitious agenda that the green hydrogen is about. So it's important that you are able to create this facility, aggregate the skills, working with the private sector so that jointly we can see how best to exploit this resource. So really the facility is to do exactly that, for us to be able to accelerate, if you like, the advancement of the project along the project life cycle. We do accept that there's a significant number of these projects that are at pre-feasibility studies. We are very encouraged in South Africa that we've got about 9 concrete projects in the green hydrogen front, and one of the most advanced is already at the stage of implementation, and like the Secretary was saying, we're seeing opportunities with regards to the variants, what you can achieve out of green hydrogen, the issues around green ammonia, which will be used for fertilizer production. As you know, we are a big part of our economies around primary agriculture, and a lot of the inflation we're seeing on the food side is really imported inflation on account of the cost, the exponential rise in the cost of fertilizer prices. So it's important that we look at those key ingredients, we are able to domesticate them, and we insulate ourselves from this price fluctuation, commodity fluctuation, currency fluctuation. And in this way, we are able to make sure that we achieve food security, not less really about the food being available, but essentially about the affordability of food on the shelves in the big retailers. So we see this as a broader agenda. So that facility is going to help us in the main to be able to achieve those things.
No, that's excellent. Yeah, I see the need and clear commitment that the government has made together with other actors to put together a fund to help catalyze. And I think we can learn quite a lot from that, the development of projects, early stage feasibilities, financing, skills development, capacity, etc. So I think that's really helpful. Turning to Minister Saleh, I see that Mauritania has, I think, a pipeline of $100 billion of projects that you aim to implement. Just to segue from the financing element, how does Mauritania see itself getting access to the kind of resources that are needed to implement the projects that you have in your plan?
Thank you very much for making us, giving us the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I think this conversation fits extremely well the framework that President Ruto articulated this morning, which is looking at the opportunities that the climate action is offering to the African countries. Let me first start by one question. Why all the stuff about green hydrogen? Why are we talking so much about green hydrogen? We are talking about hydrogen because it is an energy source that can replace the fossil fuel energy in all its usage. It can be used for transportation, it can be used in industry, it can be used for electricity, and therefore, for the first time, we have a source of energy that is carbon-free and that can replace the fossil fuel. The second reason, the International Energy Agency, in its landmark report of 2019 ahead of the Glasgow, said if the world cannot increase the production and consumption of green hydrogen to reach approximately 10 to 15% of the global production and consumption of energy, there is no way we will achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius target. So we have to be very clear. Green hydrogen is absolutely an imperative. It's not, we cannot just put it aside, despite all the complex problems, technical problems, the transportation problems, the issues that are still unresolved. Now, why Africa? Africa, as you know, is home to almost 40% of the solar radiation, some of the best solar radiation in the world, and it's the place where probably hydrogen can be produced at the cheapest cost. Looking at Mauritania in particular, Mauritania has a mixture of solar and wind energy that are unique almost on the planet. It's in the northwest part of the country, you have one of the spots, rare spot on Earth, where you have both wind blowing at 9 to 11 meters per second, and you have solar energy in a desertic and arid area, underpopulated and close to the sea. So it's a perfect place to produce renewable energy 24 hours a day, all year long. And it's probably the best place to produce energy at green hydrogen at the lowest cost. It happens that not far from there are also the iron ore mining mines. And that iron ore, you know that the iron ore, the steel industry in general, is responsible for 10% of the greenhouse gas emission. And until now, it has proven extremely difficult to abate. But green hydrogen offers the extraordinary possibility to produce green steel. Therefore, rather than not only free of carbon, but in the process, you will produce even water. And the good thing about all these nature-based solutions, that rather than producing side effect in a way, you produce synergies. In the process of producing green hydrogen, you will also produce millions of tons of water in the northwest part of the country, which is a desertic country, and therefore giving water to the population in the urban, rural, and even for the livestock. So this is why in Mauritania, despite having vast gas resources, today we have set, and our president has set one clear objective, is to establish Mauritania as a green hub, as a hub for low carbon energy and for green minerals. This is where all our policy is directed towards now, and private sector around the world seems to have also bought in this strategy. As you have mentioned, we have 4 developers that have signed agreements with Mauritania, producing something around between 10 gigawatt to 30, the biggest one of them, gigawatt of electricity for the green hydrogen by the horizon of 2035 or 2040. This project will be certainly implemented over 10 to 15 years, and it costs 100 billion. But let me stop on one thing. We have commissioned a study with one of the developers on the impact, macroeconomic impact. A high-level macroeconomic impact shows that in the process of producing 30 gigawatt of energy, you will halve the unemployment rate by 50%. You will put the country on a trajectory that will put economic growth at 10%. You will make the country net exporter now with a positive commercial balance than a deficit. It's absolutely a game changer for Africa. Green hydrogen has the potential not only to address the climate change, but also to address the other big challenge that the world is facing, which is poverty and unemployment. And in our population, you cannot sell the climate change agenda alone. The population in Africa will buy only the climate change agenda if it's also an employment and economic growth and an equality agenda. And green hydrogen as a technology has a possibility to contribute to that. And in the process, in that same study, you will give electricity at 4 cents the kilowatt to the population. And today it costs 17 cents of dollar. You are simply reducing the the cost of electricity 3-4 times. And this will give reliable industry to reliable electricity affordable to the industrial sector. And if Africa is lagging behind, essentially, it's because simply we are lagging behind in terms of access to energy, and we are lagging behind in productivity and industry. And let me here, because it's very important. If we don't address the problem of productivity and energy, you will not solve the migration problem. We have this conversation on the migration has been there for 4 or 5 decades. But the simple reality, if you have a country that is rich and with a lot of capital, and a country that has a lot of labor but not enough capital, you put them together and they are trading, either the capital need to move to the country that have low labor, or the labor will move to the country that have a lot of capital. This is the reality, and today, making a bet on renewable energy and on green hydrogen and on industrializing Africa and access and a quick access to affordable energy has also the potential of addressing at its root the migration problem.
Thank you, Minister.
I know I did not respond to your question, but
you did.
But I know you have a panel of the private sector. We find with them, it's up to them to bring the money. To be frank, yes, we have to have that partnership, public-private, to mobilize such scale of resources. When we talk about 100, 200, 900 billion, that is what will be required for us, Kenya, South Africa, and the 6 members of the AGA, African Green Hydrogen Alliance, Egypt, Morocco, Mauritania, Namibia, South Africa, and Kenya. We'll need something like now $900 million. It's a lot of money. But if you compare it to the money flowing in the energy sector as a whole, in the oil sector, you will see it's not even 2% of that.
So
it's big for us, but it's a little if we are just trying to capture part of the money that is today flowing to the fossil fuel and recycle it. And for that, we need a very strong public partnership. We need to continue to advocate. We need the multilateral bank to be on board. We need to de-risk the capital, the private capital to Africa. It was mentioned this morning also by President Ruti. We pay more or less 4 to 7 times more the cost of capital in Africa than in developed countries, Europe or the US, and that is absolutely one of the biggest issues. We need to reassure the private sector, and we had a workshop we held in Nouakchott. I'm sure Jonas Moberg may talk about it. I can see it here.
Yeah, so maybe what we should do then is bring the private sector on board. It's clear that is a key enabler. Let me invite my friend Jonas Moberg, who is the Chief Executive of the Africa Hydrogen Alliance, and the panelists, Carol Karaoke, Margaret Karaoke, who is CEO of KEPSA, Margaret Mushler, Vice President of CWP, Nicholas Leconte, Director of HDF Energy, and Bru Ayale Terfi, who is the President of Africa for Fortescue. Welcome.
A big applaud for those amazing presentations. No, you sit here. You sit there. That's great. Thank you so much. That is fantastic. This is fundamentally, we have heard why this needs to be done.
Market mechanisms work for Africa, for nature, and for biodiversity. And to get us started, and I hope with an announcement, will be Ambassador Luc Jacob of Belgium.
Bonjour, guten Abend, goedenavond. Yes, with only three official languages in Belgium, it's always a cruel choice which language to choose and to address such an eminent public, but I will do it in English. Also, of course, I do not represent the private sector. I represent the Belgian government, but having said this, being very much, as the Belgian government is very much interested indeed, in how we can lever the financial means in order to close the huge gap between ambition and needs on the one hand, and indeed what we can mobilize in terms of financial means. Now, not exactly representing the private sector, my angle of approach will be a little bit different, but will be in connection with what we have heard during the first panel. So there was indeed, we spoke about forest protection. Belgium is a long-standing supporter of forest protection, forest conservation. We have signed the Global Forest Finance Pledge during the COP26 in Glasgow, and that translates into various and substantial financial contributions, for example, to the Central African Forest Initiative, also to the Yangambi Biosphere Reserve. We also organize, we co-finance conferences on the topics that are being held in Africa. And I would like to stress indeed that point as well, which is sometimes a little bit remains under the headlights, and that is scientific research. I mean, we are engaged in a number of programs in which we work together with our African partner countries in order to build up capacity in terms of the scientific research that is so important in order to understand developments, in order to understand the problems, and also in order to devise the solutions. On FCLP, I will not go in much detail, but do know that it is, of course, on the radar of Belgium, of the Belgian government.
Within the two countries.
And we see it a very interesting vehicle indeed, that is, as has been explained, really designed to mobilize all the stakeholders and to tap into a variety of financial sources, also innovative financing. And also, as we very eloquently heard, it's also about carbon markets. And indeed, these are the topics that we have to discuss and study further, because the key to very, let's say, very important solutions can be found in them. I also wanted to say something about our more general approach to climate finance, which is also in connection with what has been discussed earlier, the interconnection, the interlinkages between climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation. Well, this interconnection is recognized by the Belgian government in its climate action in general, but specifically in Africa. And there, indeed, I would like to make an announcement very humbly indeed. In French, we say le fait d'annonce. You announce something, and then what do you do in practice? Well, I can say we have a good track record in abiding by our commitments and our engagements. And in that sense, we have a series, for example, of bilateral programs in the framework of climate action, but that are being carried out in a very integrated manner, taking into account the fact that climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation are intertwined. This series of programs, they are about 3 years. Well, we are now in the process of finalizing such bilateral programs together with multilateral partners. These are UN organizations active in the African countries, and we are currently working on with 5 African countries in order to finalize these programs that will contribute to climate adaptation with regard to smart agriculture, sustainable cities and biodiversity. The integrated approach, and this is my concluding remark, is about our program, climate change program in the Sahel region that was announced in 2021, that is spanning 5 years till 2026. It is the first time that Belgium invests in a regional program with a specific focus on international climate action, and the aim is to improve living conditions of vulnerable populations in the Sahel, to restore in a sustainable way the natural ecosystems, and to better manage natural resources. A last announcement or an information, we signed last month an agreement with Mozambique, also specifically on climate change, and during Climate Week some side events will be organized by and with Mozambique, in which also our developing agency is advising the Mozambican government in its energy transition. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. We welcome the announcement of work that will be done in the Sahel. And our next statement will come from Dr. Franny Lottier. Now the private sector starts on their investments in the continent.
Thank you very much, Madam Bogolo, moderator. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll start first by greeting you all in Swahili. Habari za mchana. Asante sana. That just means good afternoon for those of you who don't speak Swahili. The private sector has been mentioned a lot since this morning, but as you can see, we are very lightly represented amongst the speakers, but I hope not so amongst the audience. So hopefully we can take this conversation forward. So I'm going to be very practical in sharing with you what has been the progress since we met in Sharm el-Sheikh in terms of bringing innovative solutions to develop the kind of financing that is needed to deliver on the nature and climate objectives. So to start with, and I'm very happy to hear from Belgium the announcement that they will bring forth bilateral aid to the fore. We heard similar announcements from Minister Chris in terms of the role that France has played. The US and the UK have been supporting over a number of years now the FCLP along with other countries. So there are a lot of bilateral efforts ongoing to support nature finance and climate initiatives. The new player in terms of scale has been philanthropy. And I'm very happy to say that from the point of view of land restoration and deforestation, where Africa has put together its own objectives with the AFR 100 initiative, where 34 African countries have come together and said, we want to restore and reforest over 120 million hectares on the continent. And that means not only will Africa be continuing to play the role of the lungs of the earth that Stephanie reminded all of us about, but it will actually be improving the quality of those lungs through this effort. So in order to support Africa's commitment to do that, the total investment portfolio that you would need to address that 126 million hectares is about $10 billion. However, we thought if you give people such a huge number, you get sticker shock. So let's start with something small. So along with the commitment from the Bezos Earth Fund that announced their pledge in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27 of $50 million of philanthropic capital towards this initiative, I'm happy to say that in addition to that, TED Audacious has put $100 million towards this initiative, so a total of $150 million from philanthropy. And that now can be combined with bilateral aid in order to use those resources to tap into the vast market resources that are available. So where is the additional bilateral financing coming from? I'm happy to say that Germany made an announcement and has actually initiated the transfer of their funds into this pocket or bucket of 40 million euros that will go through FAO and then come into this initiative. So those now we are going now into close to 200 million of bilateral and philanthropic capital. But the intention is for us to raise then the remaining through the market resources. And here I'm very happy to announce that 2 MDBs have come forward to say that they will lend their balance sheets in order to do this. One we can announce publicly here, which is the Arab Bank for Development in Africa, that you may have seen has recently been rated AAA and stable, and therefore with a AAA rating can access market resources at cheaper rates. And that means that you can then pass on those benefits to the communities and the SMEs who are the guardians of the land and the forests in Africa. And so those are really great opportunities for us to move forward. I want to also mention that in addition, because for the $2 billion you could do a lot, but we wanted to focus on a few priority landscapes. The Rift Valley, so our host country Kenya, will be one of the countries that we focus on to deliver on that objective. The Ruzizi Valley, which is DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. And then the Cocoa Belt starting with Ghana. And I'm also happy to say that Ghana and DRC are 2 countries that the FCLP has selected to be the focus countries for which we could aggregate resources and help deliver and show that you could actually do something at scale. So Stephanie, the money is hopefully coming soon to your bank account. And then finally, because of the importance of not only land restoration and reforestation, but also stopping deforestation, we at Southbridge are the only African-owned asset manager to actually sign up to the Forest Sector Deforestation Action Initiative. And I'd like to use this opportunity to encourage other African investment banks and asset managers to do the same, because it's important for Africa to sign up, because we have the forests, as you've heard. If we don't preserve them and restore them, we will also lose the opportunity in the future. And then we are also signatories to the Mangrove Breakthrough, because we also own very rich mangrove forests along our coastal areas, and mangroves are very good for carbon sequestration. And then finally, once we've created all these assets, all the communities and SMEs will be growing, restoring land and growing trees and creating those carbon assets, we want them to also benefit from carbon trading, because so far carbon trading is really mostly the big boys game, the big players with large plantations working with buyers outside of the continent to buy up the carbon. And we would like every farmer and every community to actually benefit from that. And we can, because A, we have digital platforms now. You can see when you buy your tea here in Kenya, you can pay with your phone, right? So you don't need cash anymore to pay in Africa. So it's a very digitized society already, and we believe that can allow us to reach the smallest player. But secondly, we've joined up with the African Carbon Markets Initiative, which is an African initiative to develop and push forward carbon credits and carbon investments in Africa. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll end here because we are short of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of Dr. Franny, and I think everybody must know the story of Southbridge and how they're investing in the continent. She will be speaking in the next panel, so if you'd like to know more, do join the Domestic Mobilization panel and hear more about their work. I will then, tagging on what Franny presented on, ask Martin Berg to give us an update of what happened since the COP26 pledge on forest protection. Martin.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. So I'm Martin Berg. I'm the CEO of Climate Asset Management. For those that don't know us, we are an asset management firm entirely dedicated to natural capital. And we are a partnership, and we're founded by HSBC Global Asset Management on the one hand side, and Pollination, which is an investment and advisory firm. So with that, you probably already gathered that restoring nature and improving community self-worth, livelihood, and biodiversity is really what drives us in our investments. And what I wanted to do is two things, exactly, maybe also framing the question that we were asked slightly different, and not focus on what's not working, but I want to really focus what is actually already working. And I want to show how we are using carbon finance to funnel money here to various African countries. So the one update I wanted to give, rather than making an announcement, an update of actually money flowing, is our Restore Africa program, which we are co-developing with the Global Evergreen Alliance. It's a 150 million financing program in 6 African countries. So we're focusing on East Africa in Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. It's also part of the AFA 100, which now has been mentioned a few times, which has pledged to bring up to 100 million of hectares into restoration into 2030. So, and as I mentioned, we are really proud that we made this initial pledge at COP26. We came back to COP27. We're coming back here. I hope we come back to COP28. And what we really want to say is we are implementing. Money is flowing. We're working in 3 of the 6 countries already now. And we want to add the other 3 as soon as possible. So for us, it's really important to focus on action rather than implementation than on making new announcements. Maybe I can explain how we actually do that and how it works for our investors. And I do this really quickly. The nexus of climate and carbon is probably known to everyone. What we have designed is a strategy or fund that allows corporate buyers to pool their money and to invest this in projects. And I think what's really important is here that this is really an investment activity. So rather than talking about what is actually the actual carbon price that you pay, it's like how can we finance emission reductions from nature-based solutions? And by doing that, focusing on high-quality carbon credits. And high quality really means for us, on the one hand side, projects that of course achieve emission reduction, but on the other side also have multiple benefits at the local level, including more resilient landscapes, enduring employment, improvement livelihoods, and biodiversity enhancements. And I think that's something we should really focus on. A lot of the activities that are focused on nature when it comes to carbon emission projects have these benefits inherently embedded, and it's really important to recognize that, especially when thinking about profit sharing. But having said that, it is very important these projects only work if the local communities also understand what is, so to speak, in for them, and that there is a benefit sharing. Maybe in the interest of time, I'll shorten it here. But I think what we really wanted to show is really that these financing opportunities can be really rare win-win opportunities, and I think we should really embrace them as such. And in our view, they allow to achieve 3 things. These projects really improve the livelihood and food security of smallholders farmers and their communities across southern and eastern Africa. We can help countries and governments to deliver on their climate pledges, including the NDCs, because all the activities we are doing here now contributing to the NDCs of the countries. And at the same time, we can generate carbon credits so that organizations that want to pledge that they have become net zero can actually use them. So in our view, we actually need a lot more of these approaches to create a climate resilient world for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I understand, Dr. Frane, you have one last thing to speak to.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I wanted to mention that the one important aspect, because these are long-term, I think there's an echo. These are long-term investments that take 20, 30 years. So in order to properly do that, we sponsored the creation of a foundation called the Vumbuzi Impact Africa Foundation that the World Resources Institute has agreed to incubate and support, and it's headquartered in Kigali, Rwanda, to create this long-term capacity for Africa to develop its forests, land restoration, and create this opportunity for the carbon participation of the local community. So I should remember, especially in front of Madame Deputy Chairperson who hails from Rwanda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frane. Now I get to sit down for 5 minutes and ask a few questions to dear friend Ademola Ajagbe, who is the regional director of the Nature Conservancy. We have had a lot of conversations since Paris, well, since before then, but more so in Paris, about the balancing act of using our budgets to finance adaptation and resilience versus protection of nature and versus payment of debt servicing. So the big question is, how can countries adequately deal with the debt distress that they have, particularly those that have nature in abundance? We have heard a couple of announcements, but I would like for you to break down exactly what you see the role of the private sector and philanthropy in sustainable debt and in financing nature economies.
Thank you very much, Bogolo. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. So when I was called up to join the private sector, I'm sure my colleagues in the audience will be wondering, are you shifting camp? I'm not shifting camp. And I think having me now is actually timely, and I'll tell you why right now. All the previous speakers have spoken about how we can finance nature and climate, looking at innovative finance mechanisms, sustainable finance mechanisms, both in Africa and beyond. And I think the timing is really right. I like the way Stefan spoke provocatively about we need to finance the work in Congo Basin. So at the Nature Conservancy TNC, I think there's a bit of echo. I will move to that mic if you don't mind. You like it? Yeah. Me too. Just tell me if you can hear me okay. Better? Even I can hear myself better too. Good, wonderful. So what I'm going to do briefly is to talk about debt swap for nature and climate, because the question you asked me is really about that. And there are other innovative finance mechanisms that one can look at. But at the Nature Conservancy, we've done this very, very well. But before I say anything, I need to commend the government of Kenya for hosting this event. Don't you think it's timely? I think it is, and I think we need to give it up for Kenya. Can we do that? Wonderful. Now, talking about debt swap for nature and climate, I know many of us were experts in the room, but before I say anything more, for the benefit of that one person that might be wondering, what exactly is debt swap? I'll give you a very simple analogy so that we are all on the same level. Imagine you're a father of two daughters, like myself, and maybe you have you hold someone a huge amount of money, maybe not so huge, and you want to educate your children. And you're looking for, how do I finance the education of my children? And you go to your creditor to say, okay, can we renegotiate the debt payment term? Owing you $1,000 or $10,000 and to be repaid over a 5-year period with interest rate of 10%. And you say, okay, instead of 5-year period to cushion the debt repayment plan, I want to extend it to 8 years. And drop the interest rate from 10% to 8%. And use that saving for the education of my children. In a very simplistic term, that is debt swap. I know the expert in the room might be saying, well, there are more things to that. That's true. But for the sake of this session we're having now, to make sure we're all on the same page, let's keep it at that level. Now, how does it really work? Before we talk about how it works, let's look at the issue that we're facing in Africa. Africa, because most of the countries in Africa, they are low to medium income countries. We're facing triple crisis. The cause of climate change, biodiversity loss, and growing debt burden. Whereas Africa holds a fourth of global biodiversity, moving from Cape Town to Cairo, you see vast and varied biodiversity across the continent. Not only that, on the continent we have the fourth lung of the earth, and that's the Congo Basin. That is really remarkable. And if you check the balance sheet of any country in Africa, I don't think you will ever see biodiversity or carbon sink attributes of those countries. That's one of the reasons why we need to rethink the architecture of finance in nature and climate. And debt swap is one of the assured ways that we can do that, mechanism that we can use. So at the Nature Conservancy, just last month, we supported the government of Gabon to refinance $500 million of their sovereign debt. And that will unlock $163 million that will be used for ocean conservation, but also support their blue economy agenda. Gabon, like many other countries in Africa, is looking into transitioning from a brown to green and blue economy. So that's new money. Beyond that is debt swap for nature and climate can also support countries to meet their national and international commitment. Most of the government here represented, I'm sure you're looking at your NDCs, that is nationally determined contribution under UNFCCC. And countries are asking the question, how do we finance these NDCs? Debt swap is actually one of the assured ways that you can use to finance your NDC. So at the Nature Conservancy, we supported government to refinance to the tune of $1.2 billion, and that has helped to generate excess of $400 million for meeting national commitment. The last thing I'll leave you with before I'm kicked away by Bogolo, because I can see her standing beside me. If you're a government here and you're thinking about how do we maximize or leverage our growing debt burden using debt swap, I have a question for you. Do you think what we've done for Gabon, or maybe what we've done for Seychelles, is about the same framework, or Belize or Barbados, or what other partners like what TNC has done will be helpful to you? If you think that's something you want to do, let's have a conversation after now. Thank you.
The in-conversation that I had in mind wouldn't work with the long table. Thank you for taking initiative, Damola. We do have a session coming in, so I'm going to wrap up quite quickly and request the current panel to vacate the stage. Thank you so much for your contributions to this nature conversation. I would then like to invite for 5 minutes the Minister of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, Minister Ruslan Strilets of Ukraine, to speak about the interdependence between biodiversity in Europe and Africa and make commitments. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. I'm pleased to welcome you all. I'm really deeply impressed by how you all discuss all environmental issues and all challenges what have Africa, and that it have a lot of discussions around it. I understand that today we discuss this environmental challenge of African country, but we have a lot of common topics. It is especially important that some of these topics are sustainable development, climate change, and biodiversity conservation. I'll try to explain to you how Russia's war against Ukraine impacts biodiversity and the environmental even in Africa. Because of war, we have the front line in Ukraine is 3,750 kilometers long. This is the length of the entire African continent from west to east along the equator. Ecological damage worth more than $56 billion. It equals about 70 annual budget of the African Union. The numbers are growing every day. On this stage, ministers told about forests. Most of the fighting takes place in the forests. 3 million, think about it, 3 million hectares of forest have been affected by the war in Ukraine. That is 3 times the size of all Kenya's forest. I'm sure African countries knows the real price of the forest. The environmental damage is not limited to a specific area. Missiles and drones with bombs are all over Ukraine. There is no safe place in Ukraine now. The area mined in Ukraine is comparable to area of all Tunisia. The hostilities generated 120 million tons of additional greenhouse gas emission. Ukraine supplied food to 52 out of 54 African countries. 60% of African countries consumed Ukrainian wheat. Today, we have no access to more than 1,000 kilometers of coastline. Imagine the occupation of Kenya entire coastline and multiply by 2. Losses of grain amount to about 1.5 million tons. It could have fed such countries as Togo, Rwanda, and Burundi for a year. But Ukraine is looking for all possible ways to implement the Black Sea Grain Agreement. All countries have the right to stability, whether terrorists want it or not. In June this year, Russia's actions led to the world's biggest man-made disaster for decades. One explosion, and Ukraine lost 14 cubic kilometers of fresh water. That's enough to give people all over the world to drink 2 days. The irrigation systems of farmlands, which produced about 2 million tons of grain a year, were left without water. This is 70% of the grain Ukraine exported to Africa in 2022. The major migration routes pass through our country. Over 2 billion birds migrate from breeding ground in Europe, Siberia, and Central Asia to tropical Africa for the winter. As their habitat in Ukraine has already suffered change because of the war, their population has decreased. We are struggling for peace in Ukraine, a just and sustainable peace. We strive to create mechanisms and tools applicable in any potential armed conflict. In particular, one of these tools is the peace formula of President Volodymyr Zelensky, 10 points that covers all areas of global security. Any countries in the world can contribute to the peace formula and offer its vision of each point, so that our common interest and met. And most importantly, a just, lasting peace, which is the key to economic growth and prosperity in any parts of the world. Ukraine calls on the world to join this initiative and achieve sustainable peace together. Point 8 of peace formula is to stop the ecocide and compensate Ukraine for the destroyed environmental. An international working group has been set up to work on this issue. It is co-chaired by the head of presidential administration of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, and the former Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, Margot Wallström. The working group includes representatives